In terms of the role that New Zealand plays in the world, I think we have an amazing opportunity in the next couple of years to really make our mark in the world and become a globally competitive country, especially with the diverse community that we have in New Zealand. That has to be one of our key competitive advantage compared to every other country in the world. Kia ora, my name is Eric Chua. I was born in Malaysia and I've been in New Zealand for 5 years.
I think having a diverse population is essential because then we understand better some of those other countries' needs and cultural ways of how they are doing things or not doing things. So I think it's essential to build those bridges and reinforce those bridges so they're stronger in every way. My name is Edith Horvat. I was born in Hungary, Budapest, and I've been in New Zealand for almost 28 years.
New Zealand needs to exert itself in the world, particularly with the ethnic mix around the world and also in New Zealand. So New Zealand, I think, can also in this area be actually a role model and a lead in that, and how well we can show the world what New Zealand is doing, particularly in terms of integrating with the ethnic communities. My name is Bhikkhu Bana. I was born in the state of Gujarat in India. I have been in New Zealand all my life. I came over when I was 2. And have been here ever since.
When you have migrants, when you have people coming here, we bring our labour, we bring time, we bring our skills. Hi, my name is Monica Moo and I've been living in New Zealand for just over 16 years. I originally came from Dalian, a beautiful seaside city in northeast of China.
Auckland is a large and fast-growing Pacific population. It is important that we understand and include these diverse perspectives. New Zealand has long historical and cultural ties to the Pacific Island region. With its diverse population, New Zealand has the opportunity to create some innovative and collective solutions to benefit everyone. Marole, my name is Joe Forval. I was born in the United States of America. I grew up around the Pacific Islands, and I've been living in New Zealand for 21 years.
New Zealand is a good role model for the global world in many areas. We play important roles in advocating for social integrity and women's rights and gender equality. My name is Grace Ryu. I came from South Korea. I came to New Zealand in 1997.
If I could change New Zealand's role in the world, it would be the map of the world where New Zealand could be in the center of the world and all other countries beside it rather than at this point being at one corner of the map. My name is Bakir Hussain. I was born and brought up in Dubai, UAE. That's in the Middle East, and I've been in New Zealand for almost 2 years now.
New Zealand has a very important role in the world. It's a small country, but the influence is great. And because we are so forward-thinking and forward-doing, I think it's essential that we are aware of it and we keep doing it.
New Zealand certainly punches above its weight on many things. He tangata, he tangata, he tangata. It is people, it is people, it is people.
E ngā mana, e ngā reo, rauringa tirama, tēnā koutou katoa. Ko Caroline Bilki ahau, ko Ohene Rao, tōku maunga, ko Waitamata, tōku moana, ko te manatū aorere, te wahi mahi, tihe Māori ora. First, I'd like to acknowledge the mana whenua of Tamaki Makaurau, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou katoa. Right Honourable Sir Anand Satyanand, Mayor Phil Goff, Deputy Mayor Bill Cashmere, and our distinguished panellists, former and current members of the Ministry, honoured guests, friends and colleagues. A very warm welcome to you all. It's lovely to see you here. There's a few of my former colleagues from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, including my very first boss, and an ambassador from my very first post. So I'm feeling that the scrutiny from those early days in the ministry are on me, but I'll do my best. I hope I can live up to the excellent reputation of the ministry. I'd also like to acknowledge our online audience. We are live streaming on our Twitter feed at MFAT in Auckland, and so hello there, where are you? We're looking forward to hearing from you hopefully later during this event, so kia ora. There is the customary safety and health announcement. In the unlikely event of an emergency, can you please depart via the door you came in, make your way out onto the street and assemble on the other side. Today is Diwali, and so I'd like to take the opportunity to wish members of the Indian community the very best for their celebrations today. And on a more serious note, today is also the 100th anniversary of the Spanish flu arriving in Western Samoa, which led to the tragic loss of 22% of the population in an absolutely devastating tragedy and very sad circumstances. In 2002, then Prime Minister Helen Clark did issue a formal apology to Samoa for New Zealand's role in that tragedy, as we were the administering power at the time. And so I think it's very important to acknowledge that sorrow and that we should never forget. So turning now to today and why we at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and Trade in Auckland have invited you here. We at the Ministry have reached the venerable age of 75, and my colleagues in Wellington hosted a big event last month in Wellington, and we had former Prime Ministers, we had veterans from the Ministry who were around at very important times in our history, we had academics, we had ministers talking to us, and it was an excellent event. I attended it. But here in Auckland, we thought, how should we celebrate our 75th birthday? And we asked ourselves what's important and different about Auckland. So we thought it would be interesting, rather than talking to ourselves, that we should begin a conversation with a cross-section of Aucklanders to look at MFAT and New Zealand's foreign policy through the lens of ethnic diversity. So in that regard, we do know that the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and Trade has not kept pace with New Zealand's demographic changes in terms of the face that we present to the Ministry, to the world. Our diplomats are on average more European and less Asian, Māori and Pacifica than the general population. I guess you could say I'm Exhibit A in that regard. I'm more typical of the Ministry, but we do acknowledge that there's room for improvement, and we're very keen to achieve some improvements. We've launched this year a diversity and inclusion strategy, and the aim of it is to make sure that our staff do reflect the diversity of New Zealand, and that staff with diverse backgrounds, experience, skills and perspectives are valued and respected. So it's about diversity, but also about inclusion. And I do want to clarify for this event tonight that, of course, our diversity policy does and must encompass other groups, including LGBTIQ, and also people with disabilities. But our focus tonight is on ethnic diversity, because that's what differentiates Auckland from the rest of the country. I just wanted to tell you a little bit about the Auckland office of MFAT. I'm the head of it, and we do have a Pacific Connections team who are focusing on strengthening partnerships with Pacific Island communities here in Auckland and contributing to the Pacific Reset, which is, I hope you've heard about, as a new approach we're taking based on the principles of friendship, understanding, mutual benefit, collective ambition and sustainability with our friends in the Pacific. But that's enough from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and Trade. I would like to introduce the panel that we have tonight, and we also have two distinguished other speakers as well. We're very, very fortunate to have been able to bring together these people tonight, and I'm very, very grateful for your time. The first speaker on our panel will be Te Aroha Morihu. He's got an extensive background in the tech sector, and now he's the Innovation Officer at Ngāti Whātua Ōrākei. I think the title Innovation Officer is a bit of an understatement, given the visionary approach that we know you bring to your mahi at Ngāti Whātua, and you'll be sharing with us a mana whenua perspective. May Chen is the Managing Partner at Chen Palmer. She's an adjunct professor at the University of Auckland Law School. She chairs the Superdiversity Institute and recently conducted an in-depth audit of New Zealand boardrooms from a diversity perspective. Our next speaker after May will be Mitchell Pham, who arrived in New Zealand as a refugee from Vietnam at the age of 13. He's now the co-founder and director of Auckland Software Group, with offices in both New Zealand and Vietnam, and he's the chairman of NZ Tech. Toi Ole Sulusulu Damon Salesa is a scholar and an author and has just been appointed the inaugural Pro-Vice Chancellor Pacific at the University of Auckland. Congratulations, Damon. Malo. Damon recently published Island Time, which is a very thought-provoking book which examines New Zealand's Pacific futures. So we'll be hearing from the panel shortly. Perhaps you'd like to take your seats now, and then I will introduce our speaker, the Mayor, Phil Goff. Why don't you come and sit up on the... Yes, that's right, that's right. And Satyanand, would you like to join us too? We wanted to give them the opportunity to see the videos, and now you can see all our speakers. We'll be, before I introduce Right Honourable Sir Anand Satyanand, who's our keynote speaker, I'd like to invite Mayor Goff to speak. I think you all know him, and another former boss of mine as Minister of Foreign Affairs and also separately a Minister of Trade. Please, Mr. Goff.
Inga mana, inga reo, e rau rangatira mā tēnā koutou, tēnā tātou katoa. Talofa lava, namaste, sat sri akal, Shub Diwali, it is Diwali today, so we should celebrate it. The victory of good over evil. Unfortunately, it hasn't worked out as decisively as we would have liked in the United States, but we've made some progress. That's a very partisan view, but I see May is wearing her Democrat blue today. I know it must be Democrat blue, it couldn't be a local political colour, but sorry I interrupt myself. Daja Wanchang Hao, Konnichiwa, Anyang Haseo, Maluelele, and warm Pacific greetings, I think I'll say, because otherwise I'll take half of my speech simply in greetings. I want first to congratulate the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and Trade of reaching that venerable age of 75, a combination of wisdom but not yet decrepit, and long may it last. I acknowledge the 9 years that I had the privilege of serving, first of all, 6 years as Minister of Foreign Affairs and Trade and 3 years as the Minister for Trade Negotiations. And I'm not sure that I'd say this about every government department that serviced me, but the people in MFAT were people who were dedicated, who were committed, who were highly skilled, and I believe have served the governments and the people of our country incredibly well. So, Caroline, pass that back. I'm deeply appreciative of the quality and the professionalism of our people in foreign affairs. We should be proud of them. Can I acknowledge the distinguished guests here? That will take me almost as long as the introductions. Bill Cashmore, I know you hear Bill somewhere and I can't see in the dark down there. My Deputy Mayor, John Watson, Councillor John Watson, and Caitlin Watson, who's a member of the local board in Hibiscus and Bays. I've got that right, Caitlin, haven't I? Yep, yell at me if I haven't. Acknowledge our distinguished panel and I've mentioned May, and May to me is, and I was at Oxford with her sister Mindy, they were a couple of young women that came to New Zealand as quite young women who have become quintessential Kiwis in my view, actually, both you and your sister May, but still proud of your heritage and your culture and what you've brought with you. Te Aroha Morohu, thank you. It's great to be here with Ngāti Whātua o Ōrākei. To Mitchell Pham, thank you for your presence here. And Toi Ole Sulusulu, Damon Salesa, and congratulations on, I need to bow now, Pro-Vice Chancellor, in your presence. And last but absolutely not least, our former Governor General and the President of the International Institute of International Affairs, I should say, Sir Anand Satyanand. And Anand, we've been friends for a very long time, and thank you so much for your service to our country. You did a fantastic job in everything that you've done. And I've worked with you as Ombudsman, and I've worked with you as a judge, and I've worked with you as Governor-General, and you've now taken on some impossible tasks in mental health, but thank you for your contribution. I want to just say a couple of things quickly about the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. I think it was the 11th of June 1943. It was set up as the Department of External Affairs, and we were quite a different country then, and MFAT reflected that. A couple of years earlier, Michael Joseph Savage had said it in the declaration of war, where Britain goes, New Zealand goes. And frankly, we didn't have a foreign policy back in the 1940s and before that. We were an echo of the United Kingdom. And not long after the Department of External Affairs was set up, we became an echo of another superpower, the United States. But I'm really proud to say that today we are an echo of no one. We are proudly independent in our foreign policy, and we are proud of what we can do in the world. I never made apologies for being from a small nation. I was proud to be a representative of a principled nation. And what we've done in terms of our support for multilateralism, our endorsement of peace initiatives, our advocacy of a nuclear-free New Zealand and Pacific and world in opposition to weapons of mass destruction, what we did in leading the Convention on Disability, what we've done on environmental issues, including Antarctica, we can be proud to be Kiwis and to set our mark on the world. And proud also in the area of trade, where we went forward. We were once a protectionist country, and we went forward and we said that protectionism actually doesn't make the world a better place, despite what Donald Trump says. Having free and fair trade does, and having a rules-based international system where you don't get your own way just because you're a superpower, that's the world that we want, standing up for the rule of international law in each and every respect. So I'm proud of what we've achieved as a country, but I'm also proud of the way in which we are now shaped by our multiculturalism. I grew up in a quite different New Zealand, where we were monocultural. If you were a Māori kid at school, you didn't speak your own language. You weren't rewarded for that, you were punished for that. Where we were just beginning the start of the migration from the Pacific, where if you were Asian, you were probably from a very old Chinese family or Indian family that had been here, but nobody celebrated Diwali, nobody celebrated Chinese New Year in those days. Today, we're proud to go out and join and welcome the richness that diversity brings. And, we've still got a lot of things wrong, and some of our panel will tell us that we're far from perfect in terms of the degree of discrimination that we still exercise, but we have moved a very long way. And we are generally a country where we mix, we marry, we work, we study, and we play with people from different ethnic backgrounds and religious backgrounds, but we do so predominantly with a high degree of respect and in harmony. And that makes us special in the world. When you look at how the world is rent by division and hatred and conflict. I look at a world where you can elect presidents like Mr. Trump and Mr. Bolsonaro and Mr. Duarte, and you think, wow, isn't it wonderful having a Prime Minister like Jacinda Ardern, or for that matter, Bill English, if I'm to be totally non-partisan about it. So there is a lot to be proud of. We should celebrate that. We shouldn't be complacent. And when it did come to having a couple of people wanting to visit New Zealand that were alt-right Canadians, that actually dined out on insulting and abusing and provoking people based on their ethnicity and their religion, I said, I don't want a bar of that. We don't need that in our country. We don't need to be told by those people how we should live when what we are doing is right and what they are doing is wrong in every respect. That's far too long from me. Thank you, Caroline. Thank you to our panel, and thank you to Sir Anand, and thank you all for being here tonight. Nō reira, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā tātou katoa.
Thank you very much, Mayor Goff. And as an Aucklander who's returned after 30 years or so away, it's absolutely true how it's so lovely to be in a city which really celebrates its diversity through the festivals and so on that you mentioned. So thank you very much, and thanks for your kind words about the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and Trade. It now gives me great pleasure, and it's a great honour indeed, to introduce our keynote speaker tonight, the Right Honourable Sir Anand Satyanand. Sir Anand is an Aucklander, and as Mayor Goff mentioned, has had a very distinguished career as a lawyer, as a public servant, as a judge, as an ombudsman. He served as New Zealand's Governor-General from 2006 until 2011, and I was very proud to receive you when I was posted in Samoa several times as you came to carry out your duties there, Sir Anand. And this year, as Mayor Goff also mentioned, Sir Anand became the president of the New Zealand Institute of International Affairs. And so for many reasons, you're eminently well qualified to speak to us tonight. So I'd like to invite you to take the floor. Thank you.
MC Caroline Bilkey, ladies and gentlemen, I acknowledge everyone who is here, from you, Your Worship Phil Goff, Mayor and former Minister of Foreign Affairs forward, and all of us who gather tonight under the banner of discussing the impact of diversity on New Zealand foreign policy, which has been this year 75 years in the making. My starting point is one of setting. First, here we are in a whare in Pakenham Street, Freeman's Bay, now of course called Wynyard Quarter. Pakenham was a high-level naval officer, and this area was hard up against a busy port with warehouses, market, shipbuilding and chandlery premises. This Lysart building was iron and steel works in the day. And all of these industries around here serviced New Zealand's then largest port. The streets around here were of quite a different character to the Wynyard Quarter of today, with all the swanky advertisements about real estate that you see in the newspapers and otherwise. Town and country planning was to take until the 1950s to reach the country and city, and therefore not very far away from here, petroleum products in a tank farm and all sorts of industrial premises were common. A little further away to my right hand was Victoria Park, which was the beach of Freeman's Bay in the old days, and that was in the 1940s and 50s the home of the City Newton Rugby League and the Grafton Cricket Club, and the residential streets of Freeman's Bay and Ponsonby lay beyond that. And Victoria Park looks okay today as it did then, but I can remember coming from Richmond Road School and playing sport. If you fell and got a cut or a scratch and went home with it from Victoria Park, your mother had to apply the special thong, because if that didn't happen, you'd have an infection of quite a florid kind. So one of the linchpins in my invitation to be here this evening was that I grew up in the Ponsonby suburb of the 1950s and the Auckland of those days. The second setting that I make is that tonight's host, the ministry, began its life, as Mayor Goff has said, in 1943, with legislation creating a department of what was called External Affairs, being introduced into the House of Representatives in June 1943, with a speech from the Prime Minister, then the Right Honourable Peter Fraser, saying, and I quote him from Hansard, he said, "It has been apparent for a considerable time that there should be a department set up to deal with matters of importance from the inter-dominion, the inter-imperial and foreign points of view. The sequencing of those items, inter-dominion, inter-imperial, and only after that foreign points of view, speaks volumes of the very different New Zealand of that time, which was before the demography of our country changed, with people in increasing numbers coming from the Pacific and then Asia to live and work here. It was to take until the 1960s before the country had an Immigration Act with that name. Before then, and at the time of MFAT's inception, this was dealt with by an Immigration Restriction Act, which shows a completely different mindset to which reference has already been made. When growing up in inner city Auckland during the 1950s, people of non-European background in the community were many fewer than later. Beginning in the 1950s came a change, as people from the Pacific came to New Zealand seeking work and opportunities additional to gaining access to education and to medical and dental care. These people eventually became more and more part of the mainstream as time went on. Auckland was the natural point of entry because of being the principal gateway, then of course by shipping, from the Pacific. And the Union steamship vessels, Mātua and Tofua, they were a lifeline for people and produce. My own experience was to be at the beginning of school life at Richmond Road School in Ponsonby, one of a small number of Māori or Pacific or Asian faces in school. That same aspect applied even later to university classes or sports teams. However, the number of visible Pacific and then Asian faces grew markedly from the 1960s forward, through then to populating suburbs like Grey Lynn, then Otahuhu and Otara and Henderson, where the changes were most apparent. By the time that I came to work a stint as the resident judge at Henderson in the mid-1980s, Caxton in Henderson was said to be the largest employer of Pacific Island people in the world. A change has also occurred, fast forwarding to the present day, in the tall buildings of the CBD, which are worked in by increasing numbers of Māori, Pacific and Asian people at desks, rather than just being on the end of mops and brooms as cleaners and janitors. Through all of this time, the Ministry of External Affairs has changed from being a UK, UN and Europe-focused organisation to be far more broadly based and to be called, in the modern era, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and Trade. A ministry that promotes and supports political and trade connections with the Pacific and Asia and its countries, offering assistance and leadership in matters to do with the conservation of resources, combating climate change, and advancing governance strategies. My recipe for this evening, as discussed with Caroline and her colleague Jeremy Hall, called for me to suggest as an outsider 3 significant milestones in the Ministry's development. I nominate these as follows, as being first, in 1962, the special relationship that was forged with Samoa, which is part of a changed approach to our country's Pacific neighbouring countries. Secondly, the continuing provision of legal, medical and other technical expertise to Fiji, Tonga and other places. Tomorrow I shall be present at a meeting of Pilon, the Pacific Island law officers gathering. There'll be 48 lawyers from all over the Pacific, from countries as far as Palau and the Marshall Islands, down to the ones nearer us, who've spent a week having a litigation skills program presented to them in which they've participated by New Zealand lawyers and judges. So there is this provision of legal, medical and technical expertise. And thirdly, the development within New Zealand of foundations such as the Asia-New Zealand Foundation and the Pacific Cooperation Foundation, which have made New Zealanders, be they business people, journalists or tourists, more literate about dealing with those places. I conclude answering the question in the title by saying that, in my view, diversity is critical to New Zealand's foreign policy, combined with a challenge that this emphasis on diversity needs to be maintained, because there is evidence, like some surveying taken recently by the Asia-New Zealand Foundation, that shows up unhappy evidence of indifference and apathy. To end, I've been asked to address 3 questions. First, what makes Auckland special in the New Zealand context? My answer is that Auckland has remained a reliable gateway and has produced new strands in the New Zealand way of life. Evidence is to be found in attending, for example, a weekend market at Aotearoa or at Avondale. Secondly, provide a bird's eye view of government as I've experienced it, describing how diversity flows through and around it and how greater diversity influences government over time. My bird's eye view, ladies and gentlemen, is that government has changed from being a grey, external, monolithic, Wellington-based entity to something that today seeks to grapple with everyday issues where they occur. And as we see with the Ministry of Foreign Affairs having an active presence in this city as well as the capital, and with people better equipped to deal with that. Thirdly and lastly, I was asked for my perspective on how diversity will influence New Zealand policy in the future. My own answer is in 3 words: it simply must. Thank you for your kind and courteous attention. Kei ngā mihi atu, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou katoa.
Thank you very, very much, Sir Anand. That was a masterful speech with a personal part to it, and also a great overview of the Ministry's work and your views, given your long service to this country. And I should say that as High Commissioner to Samoa, when you came up and represented New Zealand as the Governor-General, you did add your empathy with the Pacific. I think really added to and enhanced the relationship between New Zealand and Samoa, which, as you noted, is a very special one. So thank you very much, and thank you for your service and for the contribution that you have made. Now it's time to hear from our panel, and They're going to remain seated. I'm going to ask them to speak for between 5 to 10 minutes each from their different perspectives. And I'd like to start in the order in which they're seated with Te Aroha. Kia ora.
Kia ora. Ahiaha te hau e wawara, he tiu he raki, he tiu he raki. Nā ia mai te puputara kihi ki uta. He tuki nei au te kōtiu, ko ia te pou whakairo kātū ki te waitemata. Kātū ki te waitemata i oku wairangitanga, e tū nei tihei Māori ora. This is my tauparapara. It is a Māori connection modality. It connects me to a landscape, an oceanscape, an ancestralscape, a dreamscape. If content is king, I'm the Prince of Auckland. My ancient brand has had the mana to host and be heard by people for the last 300 years. Biversity was the first struggle for us. Diversity is actually a salve for our biversity. Why? Because the many voices of the others who share the narrative of Ngāti Whātua Ōrākei are everywhere. So Ngāti Whātua Ōrākei have, in the last 178 years, tried to figure a way out of tragedy. Tragedy because a contract or a deal that went down in 1840 didn't quite go to plan. But it's very important that today we must all understand that it's not our fault. The problems, though, are ones that we all share. You see, the Ngāti Whātua issues are not Māori issues or Indigenous issues. They are global issues. Suicide, poor education, bad health, poor economics. So although I believe Ngāti Whātua Ōrākei might have better statistics than Māori, we still share the same problems. And I believe diversity is a salvation for us because it takes different minds to make things work better. It takes empathy to truly design a proper future. And we should all play a role in this. You see, the legitimacy of time and place has been validated to me when the likes of Pink want to come into my house, Barack Obama, Oprah Winfrey, she calls me whānau. What is it about our cultural capital that these beings are interested in? Well, it's storytelling. And as tourism has replaced dairy as the largest industry in this country, I think the opportunity for the story is really big. And I don't think it's about gumboots or cows. I don't think it's about bumblebee toys. I think it's about your environment and the culture right underneath you. Because when the environment was last thrivable, not sustainable, thrivable, a regenerative word. When it was last thrivable, my ancestor was in charge. And so we know Ngāti Whātua Ōrākei are going to be around for another 300 years. And there are people in this room who will validate that to you. So how do we teach you to belong? How can Māori offer you the narrative? The one that isn't exclusive. Māori isn't a race, it is a way. My genealogy and my whakapapa is what determines who I am. So my ancestors were not racist. They wanted to share mana and grow exponential prosperity. But colonial enterprise had its way. A minority of men, and I call them men, and I will not apologise for trying to continue to address the residue of that colonial enterprise. But to be Māori is not just about me, we can all be it. If we're going to be one people, like the Hobson Pledge, why aren't we all Māori? You see, when you come through my house, you become a citizen of Ngāti Whātua Ōrākei. All your ancient brands in this country will offer that citizenship to you. Connect to them, because they want to connect to all of you. We need you. The business prerogative of growth needs to be offset by the business prerogative of guardianship. Because if it's not sustainable, it's not strategic. Ka rero te hoki ngā kōrero, tēnei ka mihi kia koutou. E tuake nei au ki te tuku mihi kia koe e te rangatira, kia koe hoki e te koro matua, koutou ngā rōpū kai whakahaere, tēnā koutou katoa. Thank you.
Well, this is hard work for a lawyer, sitting down and talking. I feel as if I need to stand up. But nevertheless, kia ora koutou, namaste, talofa lava, daja hao. I am connected to all of you here in some way, so I will try and acknowledge you as I go through my address. But the most important thing is to ask you the question, what makes Auckland unique? Well, it's unique in many ways. We've got an amazing mayor who reminds me of one of the politicians in Singapore who gets paid $2 million. They recruit the best. And he could have done anything. He's multi-talented and very energetic, but he chose to be a central government politician and a local government politician. But what is actually unique about Auckland is that we are super diverse. We are the fourth most super diverse city in the world. Superdiversity is an academic term for any country where 25% or more of the population were not born here and where there are 100 or more ethnicities. In the 2013 census, we were already well and truly there. And so I can't imagine what the 2018 census will be. We already had over 200 ethnicities then. We already had 160 languages. We already had 90,000 people in Auckland who barely spoke English. They didn't list English as a language they spoke, so this is not bad English, this is just no English. So what does that mean? Well, what it means for this topic of superdiversity and the impact on foreign policy is that just as our Minister of Foreign Affairs and Trade talks about the need for a Pacific Island reset. And I just want to acknowledge Damon and the work that he's done, because he's really put that reset front and centre of all of our minds. We need a super diversity reset. You see, when I look at the functions of MFAT, the delivery of outcomes, delivery of services, New Zealand leadership, collaboration, information gathering, assessment, advice to government, stakeholder engagements, I say to myself, what happens when you put a super diversity lens around the functions of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and Trade? And you know the answer? The answer isn't a D&I program, with all due respect. And Caroline is well-intentioned, and I understand that. I look at your statutory obligations, and I say to you that you cannot carry out your statutory obligations competently and well unless you apply a superdiversity lens to what you are doing. Who are New Zealanders that you serve? Who are New Zealanders that you serve internally and externally and that you represent? My friend here has talked about the place of Tauiwi, really, because we are de facto, if not de jure, a multicultural society on a bicultural base. I am the Chief Legal Advisor for Te Runanga o Ngāti Whātua, that's the iwi. And of course, my friend comes from one of the hapu or groupings. But where is the place of Tauiwi, the people who came later in the treaty relationship? And so I say to you that I don't think that we can carry out that role properly unless we redefine who it is that we're actually serving at MFAT. Who are your stakeholders? And secondly, with respect to the staff, Carolyn has acknowledged that the staff at MFAT don't reflect all New Zealanders currently. I've looked at the stats, and it is not a criticism. It is simply saying that if you want to ensure that you have the goodwill and the support of all New Zealanders, obviously they will trust more organisations that reflect them. Apart from that, we need the sophistication that all New Zealanders bring. Why is that? Well, we've got all of these issues at the moment about whether there's infiltration and a challenge to our independence and a challenge to the values that make us true Kiwis. We need to be sophisticated in thinking that through. We can't be simple-minded and trusting and gullible, but on the other hand, we can't be alarmist. And all I'm saying is that if you have people amongst you who were not born here, who were born elsewhere, who were born in Pacifica, we're the biggest Pacifica city in the world. And when I look at the stats and find there's 5%, I know we're off the pace at MFAT. We need more people who look like other New Zealanders. I think about cultural capability. I think about languages and proficiency with languages. I think about the fact that you're supposed to collect information, analyse it and interpret it. How can you do that unless you understand that information which comes in multiple languages. I think about religions. There was a time when diversity in religions meant the odd Catholic or a Methodist. Of course, the fastest growing religions in New Zealand at the moment is Sikhism, Buddhism, Muslims. And so how much do you understand those religions? Well, I understand some of them. I was born a Buddhist, and when we came to New Zealand and my dad became well, he was an Olympics gymnastic coach, but they made him work at the YMCA and he discovered that C stood for Christian. He sent us to church. So I know a little bit about that. But, you know, in terms of having an understanding about those issues, about the opportunities and understanding of risks, about having those networks, can I say to you about understanding the different value systems now and the way the world has shifted? We now have a new world order, we do. We also have a balance of power in the world that is shifting. It's so interesting at all of the places that I speak, and can I acknowledge Sir Anand? Because when I first shifted to Auckland and nobody knew why the hell I was here, because a constitutional lawyer should be in Wellington, he was the inaugural chair of the Superdiversity Institute. He understood it, he supported me. He supported the establishment of New Zealand Asian leaders, and I acknowledge members of the advisory board here tonight, Mitchell Pham, I acknowledge Sina. There's a lot of people here who are involved in that work. Can I just say that I conclude by saying that it is essential to adequately performing MFAT's statutory obligations that you have people that will allow you to carry out all of those things that you're supposed to be doing. I haven't started talking about diverse thinking because no doubt I've run out of time. But can I just say that ethnicity and gender are only two predictors of diverse thinking. I abhor all stereotypes. I don't like people who say to me that as an Asian woman I should be self-effacing, not leadership material, only wanting to serve and a very bad driver, and extremely good at maths. But I also abhor stereotypes that say all pale-stale males are unable to be diverse in their thinking. I think that is ridiculous. But I do say to you that MFAT is facing so many difficult challenges, and I don't see how you can solve those issues, how you can see all of the risks, how you can view all of the opportunities and get all the viewpoints on the table unless you have diverse thinkers around your board table, thinking through policy issues, thinking through legal issues. And the only way you can do that is if you make sure that all of the talent pool is at your table. Thank you.
Kia ora koutou, xin chào, good evening. I would, before I share my part, I would like to acknowledge everyone here, our host, and once again wishing our friends at MFAT a huge, special birthday. And my observation is that I look at all of my friends at MFAT, and none of them look 75. You know, so how do you do that? That's quite amazing. And I've been very fortunate to have been asked to kind of be here on the panel tonight and to share something personal, something business, and something kind of industry level because of my involvement in various things. So let me start with something personal. I escaped Vietnam as a refugee. At 12, I spent nearly 2 years in 4 refugee camps in Indonesia before I arrived in New Zealand. And, you know, I have, even though refugee camps were not very, very nice and comfortable places by any stretch of the imagination, I fell in love with Indonesia and the Indonesian people while I was there, you know, and the country, beautiful country. As is the country that I was originally born in, being Vietnam. And then when I arrived in New Zealand, I fell in love all over again. And so it's been quite an amazing personal journey to actually to live in different countries, different cultures, and everything else that comes with it. And that's been a great journey. However, for the first 10 years of my life here in New Zealand, you know, adapting to the culture, the climate, and the language, and everything else here was a major challenge for me because I'd never been in a Western country before. It couldn't be more foreign at all. for me. The reason why 10 years was kind of at the point where I thought I really feel that I truly and fully have integrated, into New Zealand, and it was because of what I call humor. What I discovered was that when you have fully mastered the humor in a particular culture, then you actually have fully understood that society. So I journeyed, being a foreign, immigrant who looked like different to everybody else and everything else. I went through these journeys, and I went from, not understanding the language, and understanding the language but not understanding the jokes, understanding the jokes but not really know how to laugh at them, and then also taking a bolder step and making jokes, but other people were laughing at me rather than at the jokes. But I got this was part of the journey, so I wasn't offended or anything. And eventually, the magic happened when I made a joke and my Kiwi friends laugh. They fell on the floor laughing. And I laughed with them, and they laughed with me. And I think that was a magic moment for me, because I thought, yeah, I dig this Kiwi thing. I got it. I can do this again if I have to, which is really cool, But personally, apart from eventually after 30 years having my family reunited in New Zealand, that was major for me. But much more personally, I think a couple of other magic moments that happened in New Zealand for me. I arrived in August '85, and in May 1988, I received my New Zealand citizenship, and that was a huge, proud moment for me as a foreign migrant into this country. And I remember, going to the town hall and got my thing, and that was really, really great. And then years and years later, 30 years, exactly 30 years later, pretty much, in June 2018, I received my Kia World Class New Zealander Award. And as an award, absolutely, it blew me away. But much more deep down for me personally, I felt complete as a Kiwi, yes, I haven't just been given a certificate, but I've actually been accepted by the business community, by the industry, by government organizations I've worked with, by everybody that, hey, this is a Kiwi, right? So for me, it was another very, very special moment. So those are some of the key kind of personal things that I very, very delighted to share with you tonight. Moving on to business. Well, I first met my business partners at the Auckland Software Group. Back at university, we studied together, we cheated together, we slept in class together, that sort of thing. Bonding for life. And luckily I didn't study law. But what was quite special about this group of 5 friends who went on to found the Auckland Software Group was that 2 were New Zealand-born Kiwis. One was born in Auckland, the other one was born in Fielding. And then the remaining 3 were a German migrant, a Korean migrant, and a Vietnamese migrant. So right from the word go, as a business organization, as an enterprise, we were born diverse, right from the word go. And that was really special, and it remains special since, because today, our Auckland office has nearly 30 staff, but 24 nationalities. Right? And that's, again, quite amazing. That's just something that I'm very, very proud, we're all very, very proud of. But what is the actual impact on the business of diversity? There are 2 major impacts on what we do as a business. In the software innovation space, right, most of our projects are new innovation. And today, or in fact ever, that we've worked in the last 25 years at Auckland, new innovation requires diverse thinking. Right? Doesn't matter what race you are, it requires diverse thinking, because we're talking about doing things that's never been done before, creating things that's never been created before. Right? So we have to break outside of all of the mold of things that already exist. The second thing that was really important was the international connections, and probably the most obvious example of that was that 13 years ago, we struggled for resourcing. I ended up going back to Vietnam and set up a facility and a team there, and we developed this particular model that works really well between New Zealand and Vietnam, and we built that into a very, very strong business. And the key thing that made it successful, believe it or not, it wasn't the technology, the practice, the methodologies, and all these really cool, amazing things that we geeks love talking about. But actually, it was the cultural intelligence within the organization as a capability, and the cultural integration between two very, very different cultures to be able to effectively work well together, because every single misunderstanding when you develop software is extremely expensive. You know, so to build a viable model that really works, and it works specifically for Kiwi companies as well, has been quite a significant thing for us to do. And then 2 years ago, we took it further and launched a Kiwi Connection Tech Hub in Ho Chi Minh City to help Kiwi tech companies to get into Southeast Asia. And that's leveraging not just our cultural capability, cultural intelligence capability, but now our 13 years of, you know, in-market, in-region presence and all the connections that we then, you know, and so for the last 13 years, believe it or not, when we started going back to expand into Asia, we have always worked very closely with MFAT and NZTE, and we continue to do so today. And 2 years ago, when we launched this particular facility, it was a collaborative public-private partnership project, you know, so MFAT has always been very, very close friends to Auckland. So that's kind of at the business level. At the industry level, you may be aware, wearing my NZ Tech chair hat now, I mean, the tech sector is the third largest, you know, exporter today, but much more importantly, the future really is in how the tech sector supports all of the other sectors to grow, and to grow globally, right? However, the biggest challenge to that we face are the three key things. A huge shortage in tech talent. B, investment capital for tech companies. And 3, access to large customer markets for tech firms, right? Now, these are probably quite similar to other industries too, but I know tech. And so what we've been doing with this Auckland thing with Vietnam and Kiwi Connection Tech Hub, so far it has helped to address the tech talent. But fundamentally, the other two challenges also requires New Zealand to engage internationally, right? So no longer we have the choice of being anything other than global citizens, global entrepreneurs, and global businesses. Because today, even our supply chain of talent has to come from somewhere else. We just don't have enough here in New Zealand. So all of those three challenges can be solved by New Zealand becoming much more culturally intelligent, culturally capable, and I guess globally integrated and connected. So I think once again, that's where MFAT, together with NZTE and industry groups, as well as individual businesses, I think we have a place, an opportunity to work together, to continue working together going forward for a much greater New Zealand. Thank you, Kia ora.
Kia ora koutou, ngā mihi nui, malo lei, a whiu mai susu mai, malo lei, malo langi malo. Sorry, I have a very bad cough, so I've been trying not to cough through there. Malo e sufua, malo langi mama. Welcome everyone, and especially thank you to my panelists. One of the downfalls of being an academic is you talk too much, so I'm losing my voice. So I apologise for that. And I just really want to say 4 things to this topic. And the first is thinking through, and I really appreciated Sir Anand and MFAT raising this issue around the influenza epidemic, which is 100 years today. You know, it killed between 50 and 100 million people globally, and in most places between 3 and 5%. In the Pacific, the numbers were extraordinarily high. New Zealand suffered a mortality in the First World War and the influenza epidemic combined of about 3 to 4%. And in Samoa, it was somewhere between 22 and 25%. So many deaths that entire families died, and there were mass graves in Samoa. And that memory that Samoans have of that moment has stood over our relationships between New Zealand and Samoa for a long time. And actually that same boat also took the influenza epidemic to Tonga and to Fiji. And in each of those places there was mortality. And I think that points to a very deep history that New Zealand has. But more importantly, it calls to question a really fundamental dimension of New Zealand's way of being in the world. And that is that many parts of the Pacific, which are cast as foreign or external, are not. 3 nations in the Pacific are New Zealand. If you're born there, you're a New Zealand citizen. They use the New Zealand dollar. And one of them, indeed, is still formally a part of New Zealand. It is the most northern part of New Zealand. That's Tokelau, of a constitutional entity we call the New Zealand realm. So by those measures, New Zealand's nearest neighbour is Samoa to our south, which is quite a remarkable way and a very different way of thinking about New Zealand. So when we put the Pacific into this picture, it transforms not just the way we see the world, but it should transform the way we see ourselves. And actually, when New Zealand took over Samoa, it invaded Samoa and wrested it from the German Empire. At that moment, when they invaded Samoa, also Samoa's, New Zealand's population of Chinese people doubled. There were twice as many Chinese in Samoa as there were in New Zealand. And so New Zealand's relationships with Asia have always been refracted through the Pacific because it's right there. Although nowadays on a plane we think of just, it's just a few hours, an interval, it's a place, right? And so I think thinking about those connections and reimagining New Zealand through the way that we actually are is really helpful. And for me, I guess one of the key issues around that, which MFAT is reflecting on after 75 years, is that New Zealand's first agencies, which were quote unquote external, were actually charged with colonising the Pacific. The Department of Cook Island Affairs and then the Department of External Affairs and Island Territories. So, and they actually predate 1943. And so New Zealand has another history that we marry together in what is now our foreign affairs. And so foreign affairs has within it the agency that governs Tokelau. I think, what's it called? The Tokelau Office, administration. So these things are still very present. And of course, that is why Pacific people are so present in New Zealand. It's not all Pacific people. There are Pacific nations that are twice the population of New Zealand, Papua New Guinea. But there are very few Papua New Guineans here. Who we have are the Samoans, the Tongans, the Cook Islanders, the Niueans and the Tokelauans, with whom we had very close colonial or almost colonial relations in the case of Tonga. So the diversity we have in Auckland and the diversity we've seen since the 1980s is not innocent, and it's not just innocent miscellany. It brings with it a history and a deep history of inequality, and particularly a history about New Zealand's past that doesn't always make New Zealand out to be the hero in the story. For me, I guess, and when we think about the 75 years, and I was really inspired by Sir Anand's story because, of course, Ponsonby, Freeman's Bay were Pacific capitals. Parnell was at that time a Pacific place too. And when Samoa came to build its first formal sort of diplomatic presence in Auckland, it built it on K Road in Samoa House. And that was the first whale built in New Zealand, except there was one built in an exhibition. When Samoa came to rebuild the whale and its consular presence in Auckland, it built it in Māngere. So it moved from the central city to South Auckland. And in that there is a much deeper story about this question of diversity or superdiversity. Because there may be many diverse peoples in Auckland, but there are some incredibly deep and powerful inequalities in their lives. I work in a high school, which, well, I don't work in it, but I work with a high school. I'm one of their trustees. That school is almost entirely Pacific people, and the remainder are refugees. And this story of concentrating what could be seen as diversity, because, you know, there's about 6 different Pacific ethnicities and about 7 different refugee ethnicities in the school. Actually, the biggest story is the way that that inequality has been concentrated within the school and runs against many of our stories, and many of the wonderful things we now celebrate are restricted if we pay attention to the ways that people actually live. And I guess, you know, I wrote a book describing how New Zealand, and particularly Auckland, is not really living in diverse ways. We are super diverse at a population level, but actually the lives most people live are not diverse at all. They go to shopping centres and churches and schools where people are just like them. And they're just like them ethnically, they're just like them socioeconomically particularly. And one of the struggles we really need to address is the lack of diversity in our socioeconomic lives, right? And all Auckland is largely doing is pushing poor people into places where housing is cheap, and increasingly that's to the very fringes of Auckland. And that's a diversity I'm deeply worried about. What we have in those groups is enormous amounts of talent, different ways of thinking, unbelievable potential. And I think Mitchell and Mays Chen speak, and Sir Anand's stories speak very powerfully to what happens when we give talent opportunity. What we're seeing now in Auckland and in other parts of New Zealand is that it's increasingly unlikely that talented people, if they are poor, will find opportunity. The most gifted and smartest people in our society, if they're born to a single mother who's on the breadline and they go to a school that's filled with people who have special needs, they will not realise their ability, and we will be, as a nation and as a planet, incredibly weaker. So one of the commitments in the Pacific Reset, which I should talk about because it's where we're headed, is this commitment to growing collaboratively, to cooperating with Pacific nations to realise shared goals. And I think for me, the Pacific Reset offers a real potential because it's talking about principles that much more resemble what Te Aroha was talking about. Things like friendship. And friendship's always a tricky word because Samoa signed a treaty of friendship with New Zealand. And I don't know about you, but I've never actually signed a treaty of friendship with any of my friends. And if one asked me to sign one, I would be immediately suspicious. And probably Samoa should have been at that point. But moving towards a position of equality and partnership, and in that move, MFAT and New Zealand's key asset are the Pacific people, particularly of Auckland. And they're a key asset because the phrase that was used is that the Pacific is now contested strategic space. It's also contested economic and financial space, and we're seeing declining ability to compete economically with some of our countries we wish to compete with. And what we're seeing is we have a human resource that we can now leverage. So now, for instance, we have a sports ambassador, Valerie Adams. We have the All Blacks, which, for instance, many of our competing partners don't have. We have Super Rugby. And so New Zealand has turned towards Pacific people as a resource which can be mobilised and deployed. And I think in line with what May was saying, what they haven't done enough of is turn to Pacific people as a resource of leadership and guidance. And the verb of inclusion is a powerful verb because for so many decades and centuries, many of us in this room have been excluded from things. But inclusion doesn't solve the key problems. Inclusion really hides one of the key issues, which is what are the terms of inclusion? How are we being included? And what's happened in New Zealand and too often is the inclusion has come on the terms of other people. They've opened a door, but it's their house. They've included you, but they've set the destination. True inclusion, I would argue, changes everybody. It doesn't just change the people who are now included, who were previously excluded. It changes the people who are now including them. And New Zealand is at its best when we see that happen. When Pākehā didn't just say, oh, okay, Māori, you can come to our city or into our schools. It's when Pākehā actually looked at Māori and said, oh, that's an amazing concept you have. We need to learn from that. That transformational logic of inclusion is what is really powerful. And I know just that is what is now what's most distinctive about New Zealand. What's most distinctive isn't that most of it, New Zealanders are descended from England, Ireland and Scotland. What's most distinctive about New Zealand is the encounter with tangata whenua in the Pacific and the wonderful peoples of Asia and Africa and Latin America who have joined them. And that's the kind of New Zealand story that I think I stand behind and which I'm enriched by. And I guess the last thing, which is probably a special plea because I love the word biversity, because in the Pacific, of course, it's very difficult to matter in the same way in New Zealand. Pacific people find they don't count in the same ways, for instance, in the United States or in Europe. And so New Zealand, even aside from that special constitutional and historical relationship, can only ever be at home in the Pacific. And having sort of come to live with their whanaunga, Māori people in New Zealand, that bigger question of having not really any other place to call home than here is incredibly central. And I was struck that for many migrants to New Zealand, and one of the people in the video used that, oh, it's a corner of the world. And of course for Pacific and Māori people, you know, we understand the world is not a square, it is a globe. And I think part of the trick for Pacific and Māori people is that the Pacific was always at the centre of that world, right? And when people come and say, oh, we're so far away, we're in the back of beyond, or we're distant, they're missing the richness of this place and its centrality. And what we're seeing through the work of leaders like Te Aroha is a reclaiming of understanding the centrality of our own places and being and concepts, that they are the centre of the world when we're here. And this is an incredibly powerful moment because the Pacific leaders have been doing that too. You know, there's a new language where people have said, oh, you're small island nations, and the response is, no, we're large ocean states. Where they've said, you are remote, distant places, the response is, we are the blue continent. And so embracing what it is to be here in New Zealand, and with Te Aroha's blessing to be here in the Pacific as well, is the really true opportunity of New Zealand. We can't be anything else than be here and with all of us. Thank you.
Well, thank you very, very much to all of the panel. I must say I feel very humble being in your presence, hearing what you've had to say. Some of it is very salutary, it's challenging, and some of it's a bit hard to hear from an MFAT perspective, but I think that makes it even more important that we do listen and we do understand that this is a very complex issue. How to, as May said, you know, you can't just have a strategy, you have to really understand the underlying issues. And I'd like to thank you all very much for giving us such an insight. I think for us, we need to listen more and we need to hear people like you more at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and have people like you joining us, because this diversity in this complex world, difficult world that we are living in with a lot of challenges, to have diverse thinking, to have a diverse face is absolutely essential for us to succeed and thrive in the world. Now it's your opportunity as the audience, and we have the online audience there as well, to have your say, to ask your questions to the panel, and Sir Anand has generously agreed that he's also happy to take questions. So can I please open it up to questions from the floor? Yes, sir. I think there's a microphone.
Mr. Kai Louis.
Yes, Kai Louis. I'm chairman of the Auckland Chinese Community Centre, which was incorporated in 1960, and also chair of the Chinese Polytech Heritage Trust, which looks at issues relating to the discrimination against Chinese in New Zealand. So I think the attitude to Chinese has followed the term of ETA, exclusion, tolerance, and acceptance. But we're only partway down the acceptance mode. And I remember when I did the opening speech at our series of banana conferences, banana being yellow on the outside, white on the inside, talking about the role of New Zealand Chinese in New Zealand, which went from 2005 to 2014. I said that we have still got the syndrome of being Little Britain in the South Pacific. And we should have changed that when Britain joined the EEC. You can see from the latest thing for Brexit that they are even unsure of where they want to be in life. But this role is still here. And I think until we overcome this, we can't be a super diverse nation and super diverse Auckland. So.
Panel, would you like to comment?
It was interesting actually, Kai. I was in Singapore recently and I spoke to many officials there and they said that they didn't understand why New Zealand didn't use Singapore more as a precedent or as a comparator or a place that they could study for issues back home, like for example housing. It was interesting talking to the CEO of Building and Housing there. They have a 94% ownership rate. So, and they said, well, of course, because usually what happens, and I've just undertaken 2 studies for public entities in New Zealand, you get told the comparators they want you to research. So you always get told Australia, the UK, Canada, and so. It does take time for that reset to happen and for people to understand really where they are in the world. We are in Asia, we are an Asia-Pacific nation and yet for so long our perspective has been different. I remember years ago when I had dinner with Lee Kuan Yew, he said the trouble with New Zealand is that you've always seen yourself as England's food basket and you've really just got to get over it.
Thank you. I think we have a quiz. Heather?
Yes, thank you. I actually am ex-MFAT and I was born in 1943. So although I wasn't in the ministry the whole 75 years, I can claim some relationship. One anniversary you didn't mention in your opening, Caroline, was today, Te Araha will know, the anniversary of Parihaka. And I think we need to remember, as Te Araha pointed out, the issues that have gone through with our bicultural recognition. We need to get onto that. I will also comment that I was very fortunate in Foreign Affairs to have postings in Samoa and Indonesia, and having had a basic study of te reo, because when I joined the ministry, we were told we represented all of New Zealand. And we had Ngati Orere, the tribe that flies around the world, and we all went off and learned some te reo. And I found, because Māori is part of the Austronesian language group, learning Samoan and Indonesian was so much easier because I had a basis in Māori. So if anyone says to you, te reo is a waste of time, don't believe them, because it is absolutely not, for a whole lot of reasons. But one is part of the Austronesian language group. Now in my dotage, I've got involved in a lot of different organisations for people in their third age. I'm heavily involved with Export New Zealand. I'm a member of the IOD, all those sorts of things. They are all pretty much a white tribe. Now, I do have to say to people of ethnic or other ethnicities, because I'm British origin, well, 6 generations ago, I have to say, it is very, very difficult to get non-European origin people to join Probus, U3A, IOD, Rotary, all those organisations. And so I think there is part of a responsibility on other ethnicities within Auckland to get involved in that group. And maybe, Sir Anand, I ask you, how do we go about that?
Sir Anand.
You put down a good challenge. And I think it's just a case of keeping on. I think Rotary, of which I am a foot soldier member. I've got no big governance role in Rotary, but Rotary tries to gather people from various ethnicities. I belong to a Rotary club in Wellington that does have a number of New Zealand ethnicities in it. The next district governor of the lower part of New Zealand from Hamilton down is a lovely Māori leader at the National Library called John Mohi, and he's going to be a wonderful leader for Rotary. And I think it can happen, but it's got to, people have got to mobilise in the way that your challenge was expressed, to look around for opportunities to do more. I think I agree with you with organisations like the Institute of Directors. They do need people from more ethnicities, and May and I have talked about this in the past, and it's a challenge for them and it's a challenge for everybody.
And so yesterday when we had the advisory board meeting of New Zealand Asian leaders, we had all of these people saying, how do we connect with the IOD? Because so what happens is our members try and go to IOD, they get ignored, no one talks to them, they leave. So the thing is, it goes both ways. And so, you know, inclusion is good in theory, but in practice, if people feel excluded, regardless of the fact that it doesn't say whites only on the door, then they will not keep going because there is no benefit in it for them.
Damon.
So I guess the other, this follows on from what May said, is because at the same time some institutions have struggled to get diverse memberships, others have been very, very successful. And you can see some sports clubs, for instance, have really grown by changing themselves. You know, and I think that that's probably an important part of this story. And in South Auckland, you have now not just the Māori wardens, you have the Pacific wardens and the Indian wardens. You have three really vibrant, interconnected groups who are thriving. And so part of it is not the work of others wanting to join what we've got, but changing what we've got so they'll want to join. And that has a lot to do with what Maya said about talking to people and connecting.
Well, it's about organisations being culturally competent. That's what it is.
I think, you know, it's the power of the word too. Inclusion and diversity means that someone can say, oh, I'm inclusive and I'm diverse in my thinking. It should really be about representation. That's how you manifest diversity. So can a person of a demographic behave like a woman if he's a man? Can he think like that? Can an Indian think like a Māori? I think we need to really change the terminology to frame what the action is going to be. If it's going to be representation, then put representation there. You know, I mean, if you look, your largest brand, the All Blacks, they are diverse. The first thing they do is a haka. And it's not just a Māori doing those haka. It's a diverse group of men who have bonded over a brand, the largest brand in New Zealand, and said, actually, what are we? What's our uniqueness? It's the Māori culture that makes them unique. And yeah, I love that. And I'm not saying it's just exclusive to us. What it proves is our Māori culture is accessible to all of you. You know, you can learn a karakia, and you can learn a mihi, and you can learn a haka. Do you want to, is the question. Because if you want to immortalise an All Black, then maybe you should immortalise the first thing that All Black does on the field. And find the love and passion that comes out of a controlled frenzy. Because it is all about emotional capital. Emotional capitalists have been running this world, and how we become emotional capitalists is by invoking emotional capital. Prescribe an acknowledgement of ancestors. Why? Because without them, we wouldn't be here. Create some fabric and some strands of what's beneath your feet. It's not exclusive just to Māori. We all have beautiful colours in this room, and how they shared are by changing the words like sustainability to thrivability, diversity to representation. Actually, tell people to manifest these things as they're supposed to be, not just keywords or buzzwords.
Thank you. Thank you. So there's a question at the back.
Kia ora. So this question is quite closely related to the previous one. However, I come to this event through the lens of a young person who has been growing up in this increasingly diverse environment that we've seen in the last few decades. And one of the things which I was really struck by was the idea of diverse thinking. And that is a topic which is quite close to my heart because I have spent almost half of my life learning languages and using that as a lens to understand culture. And as it's been mentioned, just because we have a diverse population does not necessarily mean we are inclusive. And while we share the same spaces, sometimes in our schools or in our workplaces, we are still separated by economics and class, and that does not necessarily translate to integration and understanding of each other, and which is something I'm seeing increasingly as a young person, the lack of understanding in amongst a room of different people and calling it diversity. And it's a lot of the buzzwords, as you said, of policies around, especially within the education sector, that we value diversity and we value inclusion, but what are they actually going to do about it? Do they understand the concept? So I guess my question is, what, as young people growing up in this environment, how can we engage in diversity with enough respect, with enough compassion, and in enough depth to make a positive contribution to a more diverse and inclusive Auckland?
May I answer that?
Yes, Mitchell.
Because I'm young too.
I know you're young. Very young.
I certainly don't look 75 either. I believe in answering your questions, I have kind of two things. The first thing I think is that my observation is young people today are naturally more curious. And I think curiosity is the beginning of diversity. Because if you for any second think that you individually yourself can become a diverse thinker, then that's never going to happen, right? We're humans. We are naturally biased, right? Except that we will always be naturally biased. That's why we need others around us, right? So this diversity thing is something that we do together. It's not about something that I myself can just become more diverse, right? But it's much easier in today's environment if we start with curiosity, because I think that curiosity start to make us ask questions and show interest in all sorts of things going on around us. I think the second thing actually goes back to the strategy meeting that we had yesterday at New Zealand leaders, Asian leaders, and I was talking to my colleagues about this whole capability thing. So there's a huge range of diverse young people today who are, who could very well be great directors or whatever roles we see on boards or organizations or leadership of any kind. However, there's quite a big gap, right? So with a whole range of communities, quite often we see some very few really, really brilliantly well-suited candidates for participation, which then brings diversity and inclusion into the boardrooms and everything else. But then there's a whole lot of younger people who actually, there's a gap is quite big, right? And one of the things really going to be really important is we need to somehow create a supply of people who can bring diversity but who have the skills, right, to actually participate in business, in government, in leadership, in whatever it is. Right? And one of the things that could be quite good as a tool for that is something like an internship or an apprenticeship on boards, for example. Just use board as an example, right? So it may not be possible for a board of 15 white men to suddenly have the whole rainbow of colors next year. It's just not physically possible because all of those skills that are needed to be delivered at that board, right? However, there's nothing stopping that board from adding another extra seat and have that seat as an intern seat, right? And actually give that seat to someone who in a few years could then be a really good candidate, you know, for another board round. You know, so it's really thinking about stepping, what are the steps? You know, there's no magic thing, but what are the steps? And kind of starting with curiosity.
Damon.
Yeah. So I too am young, so I'll go with that.
Really? I agree with you.
Yeah, the most segregated part of New Zealand life is schools. Now, you know, and when we introduce tomorrow's schools, in 18 months, 40% of Pākehā students at low decile schools had left. The most radical thing we could do as a country is to send Pākehā students, high decile Pākehā students, to low decile Pacific and Māori schools. And you know, when they tried that in the States, many of you will know, they called it busing, and they did that. They had to send the National Guard with some of those buses. And we need to be frank that if we tried that in Auckland, we would also have to do that. That people would be so resistant because people have bought into this idea that a richer school is a better school, and that the key index of a richer school is that there's more Pākehā people in it. And so I think if we really were honest about it, the most precious thing we have is our children, and we segregate our children. So I think, you know, that's something that parents need to actually fess up to. And I know parents that do this, and they have all sorts of alibis for why they do it. People would rather pay $25,000 a year in private school than send their kid to the local school if it's majority Māori and Māori and Pacific. And that's a really hard truth for Aucklanders to hear. And the problem that we're getting is that our new New Zealanders are learning that bad behaviour. You know, and I think, you know, for me, that's the key question. We could get our young people and we could put them in a thriving, rich, diverse school, and, you know, they will love it. Young people are so resilient, and they will learn diversity by embodying it and living it.
May, do you want to add?
2 points. The World Economic Forum has brought out a report. It's got 16 key skills and capabilities you need to succeed in the 21st century. 2 of those relate to cultural capability and cultural competence. Secondly, the millennial group in New Zealand will be disproportionately more ethnic than the older group. And the reason is because of the lower average age. Pacifica 22, Māori 24, Asian 29, Anglo-Saxon 41. So it's really important that you develop cultural capability, because otherwise you can't lead, and the young people need to lead here.
Thanks for that excellent advice, panel. And just to mention that MFAT is looking at internships for that very reason, that we do need to give people opportunities so that they can be part, and we can mentor them and encourage them, and targeted internships are a very important way to go. Now, I think we should be wrapping up now. I wondered if there were one last question. I think
we
from the
have
online.
one question from the online audience.
Yes. Let's include them.
Yep. That is, how are other countries approaching the question of diversity and foreign policy?
Any insights on how other countries are approaching it?
So I've just finished a study. It's not specifically on foreign policy. It is that I've studied all of the super diverse countries around the world and their attitudes in a particular area of policy. But I have to tell you that New Zealand can well and truly lead in this area very easily. Most countries around the world are doing it badly. They are reactive, and it is ad hoc. Very few people are doing it strategically and systematically. So our ability to apply a superdiversity lens around the statutory functions of MFAT, to have the superdiversity reset, is very real, and to lead the world in this area. Because we were doing it for government departments and crown agencies, and they emailed. So when we talked to the regulators, they all said, yeah, boy, we're not doing very well. When you've got your report, can we read it? This is Australia. This is the United Kingdom. This is Canada. They were by far the best. The United States. This is Singapore, Malaysia, Kuwait, Germany, and others.
Thank you very much, May. And we were here tonight to listen to all of you. It's been absolutely fascinating, and I think probably just to conclude, I'd like to echo Sir Anand's remarks that diversity simply must influence New Zealand's foreign policy going forward. And we've talked about the people, we've talked about the issues, and I can assure you all that MFAT does not want to pay lip service to this. We're not doing a box-ticking exercise. We are very serious about becoming more diverse and more inclusive, and we're on that journey, and I think your insights and advice tonight will help us as we go forward, and I would very much like to continue this conversation. So I'd like to thank all of our speakers tonight. Thank you, the audience, for your participation, for the people that contributed to the video, for our online audience. And I'd like to invite you all to join us for some refreshments. Thank you very much. Kia ora koutou.